inshallah, as a refresher for all of us who have been attending regularly, and perhaps a good introduction to those who are joining, if anyone is joining now. We said that our religion is meant to be the solution to all of life's issues and questions and problems and realities in a universal way and in an eternal way. And part of the complexity of our religion is that it is able to provide its teachings in a very deep and in a very rich way, in that most of the time, if you know how to look for the information, you will find it, but not always in a straightforward way, because oftentimes the information or the teachings in Islam are provided in a multi-layered, multi-dimensional way. So the same teaching may apply to your individual spirituality and at the same time be addressing a very important social issue or economic issue, as we find, for instance, when it comes to zakat. And the teachings in the Holy Quran and the narrations are very clear. Even from its name and the way we understand it Islamically, zakah is supposed to be a purification for the money and a purification for the soul. But it also addresses a very important social issue and perhaps a very important community issue, economic, financial issue in society, while dealing with the spirituality of the individual, and while doing it in a way that actually addresses other dimensions of life that we're not going to get into now. Most Islamic teachings are in this manner, that the information is presented to us in a way that is, in reality, by itself, is multi-layered. Depending on which angle we're looking at the text, the scripture, the verse of the Quran, the narration, we are going to find different types of truths. But this means that when we study our religion, as we try to in a more scientific way, it becomes impossible to study it and derive objective or disciplinary realities from it unless we focus on a specific layer or a specific dimension or a specific angle. The religion itself is very holistic in that when it presents the information is being presented from many, many layers and many, many angles at the same time. It's only limited by your ability to extract those layers and those angles from it. Otherwise, the information is there. And this by itself requires that we have or we develop a multi-layered or a deeper understanding of our religion. We have to learn how to look for these angles and look for these layers in everything that we see, in everything that we find in the scriptures, in the Holy Quran and in the narrations. But it also means that in today's world, and in the manner in which we can say fortunately, unfortunately, typically sciences have evolved and have been developed, today we have disciplines. So when you look at anything, you're looking at it, especially if you want to specialize and look at it at a deeper level, you have to look at it from a specific discipline. And every discipline has its own tools, and every discipline has its own principles and its own objectives. And that's why today, for instance, you would have a discipline that focuses on understanding the Holy Quran, tafsir. Another discipline that focuses on studying the lives of the narrators of the ahadith, rijal. A discipline that is focused on specific matters of Islamic law, fiqh. common matters and principles that you use to understand law, which is called usul al-fiqh, theology, and so on and so forth. Religion is not presented in this way. The Holy Quran does not label a verse saying, this is a verse of theology, and that is a verse of fiqh, and this is a verse related to akhlaq. Everything is presented together, but we break it down in this manner so that we can study it. So all that to say, in this series, we chose, instead of focusing on a specific discipline, to focus on an object of study and to look at it from different angles, in a way that, inshallah, will focus or will allow us to meet the needs of today's society. And we try to do this by also going back directly to the original sources of our religion. And this is a very important point, and we keep emphasizing it. Because generally speaking, and unfortunately, most of the time when we study our religion, you might find people who will tell you that they have studied our religion for years, for decades sometimes. But if you press them to explain the teachings that they rely on or they believe in directly from verses of the Holy Quran or narrations, they would be hard-pressed and have a lot of difficulty linking back those teachings. And in a lot of cases, it's because the original sources, the scripture and the ahadith, are not that familiar to the majority of Muslims. And we end up relying more on the layers upon layers and generations upon generations of commentary and theories and schools of thought that have emerged with time to try to understand and try to explain the original sources. But this means that we oftentimes get stuck and get lost in those layers and never make it back all the way to what the Holy Quran itself is saying, what Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam are saying themselves. And while this puts us in certain way at a disadvantage, because when you do benefit from 14 centuries of scholarship, of course you're going to have a lot of depth, a lot of expertise, and a lot of specialization that you would never get just by individually looking at a text for the first time for yourself. Here you have 14 centuries of expert scholarship focusing on the same hadith versus you all alone looking at a verse of the Quran or the hadith. Of course, there are advantages of doing that, of going back to the commentaries and the expertise that is available. But the disadvantage is not negligible. It's not something that we can just ignore. The disadvantage of not knowing the primary sources in our religion. And this is simply our logical conclusion. Anyone who understands how our religion was passed down to us will understand the importance of the Holy Quran and the importance of the ahadith. Logically, we should all conclude, therefore, our first initiation to religion should be an initiation to the original scriptures of this religion, to the verses of the Quran and the narrations. And in fact, this could be a lifetime of study. That alone becomes a lifetime of study. But our religion itself adds another layer, beyond our own logical conclusion. Our religion says, go and learn the Quran. Directly, go learn the Quran. Go read the ahadith. Become familiar with them. Learn how Ahlul Bayt present their teachings. Learn how they use their wording. Learn the codes that they leave behind in their ahadith. This is going to make you a true believer and a scholar. True scholarship is not that you know the 17 opinions about the verse. Before that, true scholarship is knowing what the verse actually says for yourself. Knowing what the hadith themselves say. What did Imam Sadiq alayhi salam say? How did he say it? First, become familiar with that, and then go to the layers of commentary and explanation and theories that have been presented over generations to see what else scholars have come up with. But first start with an acquaintance with the original sources. And this in itself brings you a lot closer, and this is another objective in our religion, a lot closer to the Holy Quran. You develop a relationship with the Holy Quran because you understand what it's saying. You feel that it's alive, a dynamic and alive document. It's not a static text. It speaks to you. There's a relationship that you have with it. And even more so in the case of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. It's one thing to know a little bit in general about the life of, say, Imam al-Baqir or Imam al-Sadiq or Imam al-Kadhim. It's another to read their actual words, or words at least attributed to them. Tens of them. Hundreds of them. This brings you a lot closer to the Imam. You see how the Imam speaks, how the Imam teaches. Right? So this is an objective by itself that inshallah we're trying to do through this series. As we said, we focused on a first theme as an object of study, that theme being knowledge and reason in Islam. And of course, this was not chosen randomly. We began there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We began there for a number of reasons. Inshallah, they have become clear for those who have followed the series. In a lot of cases, for most of us, I would say, we need to be rewired. We need to reformat our thinking and bring ourselves closer to religion. And the entry point to this is to understand what our religion says about learning and about thinking. And then even if you go to a more logical way and a logical analysis of anything, of any topic in today's world, in philosophy, first you start by developing what they call a theory of knowledge. How do you learn? What can you learn? What are the tools that you have to learn? What should you learn? This is called epistemology, or the theory of knowledge in philosophy. And this is your entry point into, then you start learning. First you understand what are the limitations of knowledge? What are the tools of knowledge? And is there enough energy and time to focus on everything? And if not, then what do you prioritize? And how is it to be used? And is all knowledge the same, or are there responsibilities? This is all studied in what they call epistemology, or the theory of knowledge. So even logically, even if you put religion aside, logically, you see that this has to be the entry point to studying anything further. Studying ontology, studying being, and everything that comes out of being, which is the world, reality. That's on one side. If you go to our religion itself, now that we are within the religion, we see that our religion also emphasizes these two notions more than anything else. At the level of being, there is nothing purer, nobler, more holy, more praiseworthy in our religion than reason. And this can be understood at a literal level. Very simply speaking, we have plenty of ahadith related to this. أول ما خلق الله العقل. Why? Why would the ahadith say this? Why is it important to know this? Why would the aql or reason or intellect, why would it be created before everything else? And then what is the deeper meaning of aql? What does it really mean? Is it my intellect? Mine and yours? Just our way of thinking? Or are there deeper meanings to this? And how do these relate to us? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began everything through aql, intellect and reason, this is already giving us an indication. And then more directly in our religion, you go back to the teachings. What should you learn? How do you learn? Whether you want to learn in general or you want to learn religion specifically. أول الدين معرفته. You need knowledge and knowledge of God. Everything starts with knowledge. Everything starts with this tool that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, which is reason. And so we chose this as an entry point into our religion because we feel our religion tells us this is the entry point. Our reason tells us this is the entry point. And it allows us to enter this religion from the right path, starting with the right thing. When we began this theme, we began with a general introduction to the importance, and then we saw that it's not enough to say the importance of reason and knowledge and intellect in religion. We have to say the necessity. Because we saw that in our religion, there is no option where you are not learning and you are not engaging in thought and thinking for yourself and using your reason and continuously learning, acquiring knowledge. That was not an option. So therefore, in our religion, conclusion from that part, in our religion, reason and knowledge are not only important, crucially important, they are considered necessary. Without them, you are not really a believer. Period. Okay, so this gives us further reason to enter religion through this gate and through this path. Then we looked at the alternative. And the alternative was jahl, which we translated as ignorance and foolishness, both together, because that's what it means. And we said no equivalent in English to refer to both notions. But you go back to Arabic and you go back to jahl as a term in Islam, and you see that it refers to those two things. One of them has to do with your lack of knowledge. That's jahl, that's ignorance. The other has to do with how you might behave, foolishness. And the Holy Quran uses it in both ways. And the hadith use it in both ways. So jahl is not knowing, and our theme is knowledge. And jahl is also not behaving in the right way, the foolishness. And we saw that foolishness is unacceptable in our religion, in both senses, in how you behave and in not knowing and remaining in a state of not knowing. This is not a good, valid reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not accept that as a proper excuse. I didn't know. As we saw in the ahadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask the person, why did you do so and so? Or why did you not do so and so? And the person will say, my Lord, I did not know. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer, why did you not go learn? What prevented you from learning? What's the answer to this second question? The first one is, I didn't know. The second question is, but when you didn't, you found yourself not knowing. Why didn't you go learn? And so ignorance, foolishness, both are considered unacceptable. So we then come back and say, okay, where do I start? And we saw that in our religion, where do I start can take us in different paths, can be answered in different ways. What should I do? Or what should I learn? So before I go any further, we gave a giveaway or a hack so that we don't find out at the end, because we already know the answer, we put it at the beginning. We said there are two conditions. If they are met, then all of your actions, including seeking knowledge, including acting in this world, everything that you do is going to be considered Islamic. And in the end, is this not what we are all aiming to do? We want what we are doing to be acceptable, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, yes, you are doing as you were supposed to be doing. So how do I do that? Applied in this case, what do I learn? What do I do with this knowledge? Where does it start? What are my next steps? And in a lot of cases, we therefore jump, even if you look at the majority of works written, or the way it is taught, we jump right away into, and inshallah we're getting there, the types of knowledge. What does reason say, and what does Islam say about the types of knowledge we should focus on? That's a logical conclusion. But if you know this hack, or if you know this secret, then that conversation changes completely. Which is, Islam says it's not so much the type of knowledge that you're acquiring, or the type of action that you're doing. It's two conditions that you have to keep in mind that give it its value, that give it its weight and its merit. And those two conditions are, what is your intention behind acquiring this knowledge? And what is your intention in using the knowledge that you have? One. And two, are you going to do anything with that knowledge or not? Action. And those are the two conditions. And we spent a considerable amount of time, perhaps over 20 some lectures, on both of them together. And we call the first one, because that's the purest form of that intention, we call it sincerity. Ikhlas. It's what is your intent? And if you have the purest form of intent, then you have sincere intent, sincere intentions, or sincerity in acquiring the knowledge and then in using the knowledge. If you meet that, if you can check off sincerity, you're already there. It's very secondary. It becomes a small detail. What type of knowledge? So long as sincerity is checked off, which is not an easy thing to do. But now we know. In our religion, this is much more important than the type of knowledge that you're acquiring. It's how are you acquiring? It's all about the purity of the heart. And we often forget this in our world. We focus on the external. We focus on the appearance. We focus on the big names and big words around it. At the end, is this contributing to purifying your heart? This is what brings you closer to God. This is what makes of you a better human being. Why are you seeking this knowledge? What are you going to do with this knowledge? That's first condition. And secondly, in our religion, because of the emphasis of this point, we had to add it as a second condition. In our religion, knowledge is not knowledge if it does not translate into action. And we said this is because of a deeper principle, which we spent a little bit of time on, to explain that knowledge has to be transformational. It changes you from the inside because it's affecting your heart. Of course it will. So of course it's going to change how you behave and how you act in the world. Of course, if it's true knowledge. Otherwise, that knowledge will remain theoretical. It's just raw information that you carry. And in fact, our religion says this is detrimental to you. This will be used against you. Others may benefit from it. But for you to carry knowledge and do nothing with it, this is going to come back as you having had a responsibility and a duty and not honoring that duty. And not acting in a way that is dictated upon you by this responsibility, by the knowledge that you carry. So knowledge is important, necessary. Ignorance and foolishness is not an option. What do we do next? Whatever we do next, let's make sure that it meets two conditions. And then we can talk about everything else. The two conditions are, let's make sure that it's sincere and that it leads to action. If that is met, then we can already be certain that everything we will do, insha'Allah, will be Islamic. Now, concretely, what does that mean? Where do we start? Our religion says we have to now start by seeking knowledge. I now have to become a learner. So what does that mean? So we went back to re-emphasizing not only the importance, because now we are focused on the learner, but the necessity of being a learner in Islam. Our religion says it is compulsory, it is obligatory, it is necessary for you as a believer to be a seeker of knowledge. And we went into the ahadith to see that this is emphasized until the end of our lives. Whether you live 20 years or 150 years in this world. This state should never stop. At no point should you be saying, I have enough knowledge. I don't need any more. There's something that you have really missed in the teachings of Islam if you think this way. You constantly have to be acquiring and seeking knowledge, deepening your knowledge, better understanding the world, and understanding how your religion asks you to see the world and act in this world. We went through the characteristics of the effective, we called them the ingredients, I think, of the learner. to see what Islam tells us about becoming the exemplary learner. What do we need to look at? And we saw that in our religion, there's really a lot of teachings about this. From how we sleep, to what we eat, to when we study, to how we study, and so on and so forth. We went through a lot of details because I think a lot of these details are actually relevant even beyond into general life and how we structure our lives and our lifestyles and our daily lives and our weekly and our monthly and our yearly lives and our life plans in general once we understand what Islam says about being a learner. We continued in trying to understand the learner in Islam by looking at the manners, the traits, the characteristics of the learner. And finally, we ended that discussion with the merits of the learner. All the honors that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows on this person in this world and especially in the next world. If you actually fit the category of being a seeker of knowledge in the eyes of God. It's very difficult to beat that category in honor and favors from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with anything else. If you are truly a seeker of knowledge, and we saw the ahadith, if you are truly a seeker of knowledge in the eyes of God, nothing can match that honor. Perhaps only matched by or exceeded by, but it doesn't stop you from being a learner, is being a teacher. That's it. There's nothing else. And we went through the ahadith. So that was the first part of the conversation. Now I have to become a learner. That's what next? As I became a learner, we also saw the ahadith steering us in a certain direction, which is the moment you learn, you have to start teaching. You have to spread the knowledge that you have. So now we have to understand, what does Islam say about the teacher? And we said this is also a very awkward translation of the word used in our religion. Because our religion usually does not talk about the teacher. The teacher is one function of the person who carries knowledge. You are a carrier of knowledge. You are a muta'allim, you are talib ilm or muta'allim, or you are a alim, a carrier of knowledge. But we translate this as a scholar, and then we have to break down the tasks of the scholar, the function of the scholar, the functions of the person who carries the knowledge into, for instance, teaching. And we saw some references to teaching. There were references. But really, now we have to look at, now that I have gone and began this journey of mine, of becoming a seeker of knowledge, then clearly I'm carrying a certain amount of knowledge. It's progressive. It starts slowly. It's perhaps a very little bit at the beginning. But quickly this is going to accumulate. And now I am carrying a certain amount of knowledge, which inshallah will continue to increase. So if that is the case, now what? So now we started to focus on the second big theme, which is, what does Islam say about the alim? Does it say anything special or not? And again, we went through something very similar in terms of a structure about the teacher. First, we began with a discussion on who is the true alim. Who is the true carrier of knowledge in our religion? That's one. Once we got that out of the way, we saw how much emphasis there is in our religion about making sure that we are choosing the right source of knowledge. You are choosing this person to call a scholar, to call a source to allow this person to affect your mind and affect your heart. You choose this person very carefully. The hadith then took us towards the characteristics and the traits of this person, and we looked at them from different ways, different angles. Some of them were positive and some of them were negative. Positive as in the sense these are the characteristics that you're always looking for, but the characteristics that they possess. As in, for instance, they have expertise in the matters in which they talk. They have expertise in how to communicate. They have the wisdom and the judgment to communicate it properly in the right format, in the right circumstances, and so on and so forth. The negative ones are what you hope, what you expect this person to stay away from. They cannot be someone who is drowning in worldliness. They cannot be someone who has arrogance. These are the negative traits. So Islam emphasized both so that there's no ambiguity left. You know what you're looking for, and it doesn't stay silent on what else they may have that you want to make sure they don't have. No, Islam mentioned those things too. And the characteristics were long, and we went through many of them. Some of them have to do with the knowledge they carry, because that's really what is supposed to be what's attracting you to them, and what your need is from them. I need information from them. But we saw that the majority of the emphasis that we found in the Holy Quran and in the narrations when it came to the scholars was not how much knowledge they had. Not in the sense that we call knowledge. Even though the hadith were clear, you're of course looking for someone who has what today you would call the breadth and depth of the information that they have. That's important. But that's the easy part, according to our religion. How much information you can carry, that's easy. Because our religion says these are people who are affecting you in your heart. That's what you're looking for. I'm looking for the person who is going to give me this information and everything else that is going to affect my heart, to touch my heart. And that's why I have to look at the type of belief they have, the type of attitude they have in this world and towards this world, the type of morals they have. I don't know if you remember, to me it's striking how many ahadith are emphasizing humility versus arrogance. Again and again. Because this is contagious. This is going to be someone who affects you this way, whether you realize it or not. These are moral traits. What's the relationship with God, with prayer, with religion, with the afterlife? You remember the ahadith. Do they remember the afterlife? Is the afterlife their priority in life, or is this world? As opposed to telling you how much information do they have and how much degrees do they have. Right? Our religion focused on a moral dimension, a theological dimension, a spiritual dimension. And so this opened the door for us to really go through a number of characteristics, a number of traits that were mentioned. And then we emphasized this point multiple times through our discussion as we were going through these characteristics and those traits, saying that really the reason why we're spending so much time on them is that this is not about the teacher and the scholar. This is about ourselves. First, because now that I am on this path of seeking knowledge, then all of this applies to me. This is what our religion is telling me I should be. If I am now carrying knowledge, I shouldn't be thinking every time I see a hadith or I see a verse of the Quran saying those who carry knowledge should have so and so traits, that I think about it as, always towards the outside, has nothing to do with me. I'm looking for people, and I have a checklist, and I want to see who among the people that I can see can meet this checklist of mine. Never thinking about myself in this. No, these are characteristics that have to be found in myself. I now carry knowledge. I may not have as much knowledge as someone else, but the characteristics apply to me the same way that they apply to the scholar, to the alim. Of course, they have more knowledge, therefore, there's more duty and more responsibility upon them. Those characteristics have to be even clearer, but there's nothing preventing you from having an even higher level and higher degree of these characteristics and these traits in yourself than you find in the person who has the information that you may not have. And so this is a huge part of the reason why we spent a bit more time on the characteristics and the traits of the scholar, of the person who carries the knowledge, is that we said this is more about us and trying to make sure that we develop ourselves towards this. Towards making sure that this list of traits and characteristics is to be found in ourselves. The alim is supposed to be the person who best represents religion. This is the symbol. This is the representative, officially. And that's why this is such a crucial role, such a dangerous role, is that every time you see this person, whether they are in that situation or not, whether they are playing that role or not, people, and this is human nature, associate this face and this person and this name with religion. You don't represent yourself anymore. And it can be very silly things. And we all know the stories. Just because the person sat this way or ate that way, suddenly it's generalized to religion and the people of religion. When this is just an individual, unless they are an infallible. And that's why we said no matter where you look in the ahadith and in the verses of the Quran, the true meaning of the scholar, the carrier of knowledge, is the ma'soom, can only be the ma'soom. Because this is the only perfect example of religion. In every aspect, from the personal life, individual life, to the more social, whether they are sitting on the pulpit preaching, or you look at every little detail of their lives, this does not apply the same way to anyone else. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is your perfect example of religion. This is your uswa. This is your exemplar, the excellent model to follow. And so, the characteristics and the traits are supposed to be what we find in the person that best represents religion. Which means that to us, even if we were to put knowledge aside, as a general Muslim, this is what you should be aspiring to. This is the best version of what Islam has to offer, or the religious teachings have to offer in this world. You want to find that out, that list, you go to what our religion says about the one who carries knowledge. Because that person is supposed to be the representative of that religion, of those teachings. What does Islam say about the teacher when it comes to how they are individually and in their moral traits? What does it say about their beliefs? What does it say about their spirituality? What does it say about their worship? What does it say about their generosity? What does it say about their courage? What does it say about that? You go through it and you see that, yes, it's talking about the person who carries knowledge, but really it's talking about the perfect example of the person who truly believes and applies this religion. And so this is the second reason. One, we have to find it in ourselves because we are now carriers and seekers of knowledge. And two, because this is the best example, the best model to be followed by anyone who is a believer. Then we went to a discussion towards the duties and the responsibilities that stem out of the knowledge that we carry, which are very clearly and explicitly presented in the case of scholars. And we saw that these duties, these responsibilities fall in different categories. You have a duty and a responsibility towards yourself. If you carry knowledge, make sure that you're doing something about it and don't do anything that contradicts the knowledge that you are doing. Otherwise, and we saw the many, many examples, the very harsh examples used in the Holy Quran, used in the narrations. If you don't do anything with the knowledge, and worse, if you do something that is contradictory to your knowledge. It's one thing to see in a case you remain indifferent. You're simply missing out on an opportunity. You know something is thawab, you don't do it. You're missing out on an opportunity. This is bad enough. But you know something is haram and you go against it. This is a completely different level. And the more knowledge you have, the better you know this, the more certainty you have, the more you understand the implications. This is the difference between me, who has a simple rudimentary understanding of religion, and the scholar who knows the intricacies. When I say ghiba, I'm not supposed to be doing it, but I haven't thought about it. And the scholar who has read, 25 books on it and has taught what ghiba is for years, understanding what it does to you as an individual, what it does to your spirituality, what it does to your belief, how it ruins your heart, how it ruins families, how it ruins the community, how it ruins society. Completely different level of understanding. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to look at both sins in the same way. Right? And so this is what we said. You have a duty towards yourself, one, as a scholar or as a carrier of knowledge. There's a duty towards yourself, towards the knowledge that you carry, and another way to say it, a duty towards God, for the knowledge that He has given you. And then secondly, and this is more related to what we were discussing, the duty that you have towards the learners. How are you supposed to carry yourself to those who are learning from you? And we saw the emphasis on compassion and mercy and patience and humility and so on and so forth. And then we said there is also a duty towards the community in general. Those who need you. Those who need the knowledge that you have. It's not about you as an individual. Those who need the knowledge that you have. What are you doing with it? Are you spreading it? It's a heavy duty. It's a burden that you carry now. No different, and we spent enough time, inshallah, these notions come back to your minds as we go through them without having to repeat. To me, the miniature, it's not as deep as an example, but there's a lot of correlation, a lot of analogies between knowledge and wealth. Wealth is the material version of it. And knowledge is the more spiritual and intellectual version of it. Just like when you have wealth, there's a burden, there's a responsibility. Others don't have what you have. What are you doing with it? And there's different things that you can do. But there's always a burden that is felt. The more you have awareness and consciousness of these things, the more you feel it. There's a burden that comes with the responsibility. How are you? If you remember how Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about the Holy Prophet, he says he was like a physician, a doctor, a medical doctor. كَالطَّبِيبِ الدَّوَّارِ, he says. Today, the doctor sits in their clinic, in their office, or in the hospital, and you go to visit them. You go consult the doctor at their office. The Holy Imam Ali alayhi salam says the Holy Prophet is the one who would go around visiting. He is the dawar. He goes knocking on doors, looking for someone that might need the knowledge and the faith and the spirituality that he carries to give it to them. This is the burden. This is the responsibility towards the community. What are you doing to push it out there? To make sure that the knowledge that you carry, the influence that you can have, is actually being communicated, being transmitted. And then finally, we also saw, we didn't spend too much time on this, but we spent enough time to make it clear that there's also a social responsibility. A responsibility towards social justice. And this was emphasized because if you don't do that, then it means that religion is becoming complicit. Religion is becoming indifferent to social injustice. You as a scholar you have to take a stance. You have to clearly show where is religion. Religion is not a theoretical, ethereal, invisible, notion. It's the people who are religious. You are the religion. The community is the religion. These human beings, depending on how they apply the religion in the real world, this is the religion as it is found in the world. Otherwise, it stays as notions and beliefs and concepts in the Holy Quran and the narrations, in the books. It stays in ideas. If it doesn't translate into actions in the real world, then this is not really a religion for this world. And so we saw the traditions, we saw the narrations that talk about the social duty or the responsibility of the scholar towards social justice. Okay? And then we spoke about, and we intentionally kept those two headings towards the end, now that we know the very heavy burden and responsibility and duty of the scholar. We understand because the characteristics are also duties and responsibilities. The traits are also responsibilities and duties. And now in addition, we went explicitly to the duties and responsibilities towards the self and God and knowledge and learners and social justice and the community. Then we spoke about the rights of the teacher. The manner in which they are supposed to be dealt with. How should they be treated? How should they be How should we conduct ourselves with those people when they are in the community, when they are in the world? Okay, so those were some of the rights, we called them, of the teacher or the scholar. And of course, we had a whole discussion. I'm trying to wrap it up quickly. We spoke about the reason for this is that it's not because of who this person is, but because of what they represent. It's the greatness of knowledge, the holiness of knowledge, the nobility of knowledge that they carry, that they earn this, not because of who they are in themselves. That was one. And in fact, this is a sign of faith. As we said, if this person truly is a representative of religion, what you're trying to do is to honor and to elevate religion by honoring and elevating the people of religion, the representatives of religion. That's what you're trying to do. And that's why honoring such a person is considered, and you have indications of this very clearly in the narrations, that this is a sign of faith. And then finally, we saw that this is also psychologically, this is important because it's not easy to carry all of this burden. In a lot of ways, this is very thankless, very difficult for someone to truly meet those characteristics. To be that person, it is not easy. And so in addition to all of this, you as the community benefiting from this person, don't show any encouragement to this. Don't make this any easier for the person. Why would they keep going? Just psychologically. You have to do your part in facilitating. And so these were some of the reasons why we said the rights are important, and our religion has made a point to talk about them. That this person has rights over you. Treat them in this way. Honor them, respect them, and so on and so forth. And then finally we went to the merits. What are the merits of this person? So we said, given the duties and the responsibilities and the difficulty of really achieving this role, if you are truly achieving this role, not in name and in appearance, if deep down in your heart, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are truly someone who has reached this rank, then what are your merits? And what are the favors that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has reserved for you, kept for you, that will only truly be seen and witnessed in the afterlife? And we saw that. This is where we said there's absolutely nothing that matches this rank and that matches these honors and these favors. So after the learner and after the teacher, we said that we have here the main ingredients for something even bigger. And a new notion that perhaps we have not emphasized enough, but that when we look at the verses of the Quran and when we look at the narrations, and in fact we saw hints of it throughout the whole series until now, we need to focus on a new notion that we're coming up with, but we think that it deeply exists clearly in our religion, which is the community of knowledge. What these two components represent are the two main pillars of something called a community of knowledge. Community of people that come together around knowledge, around reason and knowledge. But they are not the only ones. And so we started to talk about, and this is where we stopped, and inshallah what we will be building on as we continue. We said first, before we talk about a community of knowledge, we need to establish a few things. The first one, the notion of community. And what does it mean? And we saw that in our religion makes it very clear that as much as there is importance given to the individual, as you as an individual person living in this world, there's as much importance given to us as a collective living together, having rights and having responsibilities towards each other. And this applies to very small units, such as a family, to larger units, and our religion emphasizes each one of these. It's just not our topic right now. We're going to come back to this in the later themes, inshallah. The family, the neighborhood, the community, and then society at large, and then the world. And in fact, beyond the world of today, because you have to look at the past and you have to look at the future. How you fit into humanity. All of this has been talked about directly in our religion. So the notion of community exists and is not one that we're creating, ourselves. We're not forging a new notion. This is the notion of ummah. And we saw how the Holy Quran talks about this, and this, we emphasized the Quranic principles when we started to talk about community, to establish it, because I think we're establishing something new. We need to explain it through the main foundations. We're not just repeating or adding to things that already exist. So first, the notion of community. Second notion, the community within the community. Yes, there is a larger community of believers in this religion, believers in the Quran and the Holy Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a general community of believers. In fact, it even extends, right? With Ahl al-Kitab, for instance. That's an even larger community. But within the community of Muslims, we saw that there are multiple communities that the Holy Quran identifies. The Holy Quran gives us their characteristics and their traits, and it tells us how can we belong to that community. You need to meet certain conditions, to behave in a certain way, to earn your place as part of that community. This one is different than that one. This one has a higher rank. This one has a middle rank. This one has a lower rank. Which one do you want to believe in? And which one do you want to be part of? What are you willing to do to be part of it? So this is the notion of the community within the community. And then specifically, as part of these smaller communities, now we want to ask, is there such a thing in our religion as a community of knowledge? Is one of the communities a community of people who come together around knowledge, around seeking knowledge, sharing knowledge, learning knowledge, given that they understand all of this? And we saw that clearly. This is also very clearly established. There is a community of knowledge. Who should belong to the community of knowledge? We already have, very clearly, we have already established that the seeker of knowledge and the person who carries the knowledge, the learner and the teacher, they belong to this community. But who else? In short, we said, everyone. It's just a matter of realizing that you are and doing what it takes to be part of this community or not. And we saw how the Holy Prophet, for instance, and we found it in other ahadith, and we found it in the Quran, and we found it in the ad'iyah, how it talks about, for instance, at least, if not being a scholar, then be a teacher. If you are not able to become a scholar or a teacher, then at least be a learner. And if you can't be the scholar and the teacher, nor the learner, then at least listen in. Be of those who sit in those gatherings. And if you can't be of those who at least sit with them, then at least love them. Support them. Show your love to that. Make sure that these types of gatherings continue. And then I'm not going to go through the rest of the details. We basically established that everyone in what we call the community today has to be part of this community of knowledge. But of course, within that community, there are people who are playing a bigger role than others. But we're all part of this community. Within that, we said we were talking about the who. Inshallah, I'm going to come back because that's what's left to finish off this heading of community. We haven't finished off who belongs to this community. Before we continue to who belongs to this community, we spent a bit of time, because we found it in the ahadith, we spent a little bit of time talking about the how. How does this community get together? Because the hadith forced us. Otherwise, we should be talking about it a little bit later. The how of this community, we said that first, there was an emphasis that the community must choose the right sources of knowledge, the right teacher, the right scholar, the right influence of the community to drive it in the right way. 1. 2, gatherings. And gatherings in person, and gatherings that are frequent, at least weekly. Minimum, if you will remember the hadith of the Holy Prophet ﷺ to Imam Ali, he tells him, never allow the days of being without a scholar in the presence of the scholar, away from the gatherings of scholarship and knowledge, never allow those to exceed 40, because the heart hardens. And then we had a whole discussion about how the Holy Quran talks about the hardening of the hearts. We said it's a whole cycle that the Holy Quran explains. It seems that they're simple words that the Holy Prophet is saying. If you go back to the Holy Quran and you put the verses in order, you see that it was saying, for instance, that the hardening of the heart starts with committing sins. After you commit sins, the Holy Quran says, therefore you have broken your covenant with God. If the covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is broken, the heart starts to harden. When the heart hardens, you become more daring to perform greater sins. The heart starts to become desensitized to what it was doing before, and it seeks greater sins. And the heart becomes blind and deaf and unable to understand divine guidance. And in fact, the Quran says, and it opens to the inspiration, the revelation and the inspiration of the devil, of Satan, who will whisper and who will influence you towards those greater sins. And you have nothing stopping you because your heart is now deaf and blind. So you engage. And as you engage in this, the sins become greater and greater, and the cycle goes back. The heart becomes even harder, and it becomes even blinder and more deaf to the ability to understand, comprehend, use divine guidance. The guidance is there. Two people see it. One person is influenced by it, the other is not. What's the difference? Why is this heart open and this one not? We understand this and it looks like it's doom. So how do we break out of this cycle? The Holy Prophet says, he gives us the key here. He says, attend the gatherings of scholarship. True scholarship is going to undo this cycle. That's what he's saying. He says, if you don't attend, the heart will harden. So the logical conclusion is, by attending, the heart remains soft. This doesn't happen. This cycle never begins. But this also gives us a clue of what is the scholarship we're seeking. It has to be the scholarship that touches the heart, that keeps the heart soft. It's not just raw information. It's information that touches our hearts and keeps them soft. They don't harden and we don't engage in more sins. We also saw in the ahadith how Imam Ali alayhi salam, for instance, spoke about the benefits of attending mosques. And we said this applies now. So part of those benefits, of course, is that you are going to acquire new knowledge or at least refresh old knowledge. And Imam mentions both. The Holy Prophet here is saying, and it brings your heart back to life. It keeps your heart soft. Imam Ali alayhi salam spoke about the spirituality and the mercy. He spoke about the social utility. You get to meet someone and they get to meet you. And there's a lot more social cohesion within the community, even if it's not just knowledge sharing or knowledge receiving. You are seeing brothers and sisters in faith and they are seeing you. You might need them. They might need you. This is part of the community. More than that, there's an encouraging and an urging of each other. As you attend, you're constantly reminded of being better, being stronger in your faith, in your belief. There's an encouragement, and we saw that there's also, so that I don't dwell too much on it, you do become better, you try to become better out of embarrassment, if you will remember. You should be too shy now, surrounded by all these believers, people who are worshiping and who are praying, and this is how you conduct yourself when you're with them. That's it. You should be too embarrassed to go back to sinning if you are in these types of gatherings. This is fine. This is a hack. We called it a life hack. Use it. This is not hypocrisy, and we spent enough time explaining this. If you think that this is hypocrisy, you missed something. You truly believe that this is the way you're supposed to be. Put yourself in a situation that forces you to remain good. Don't put yourself in a situation that makes you want to sin, where the sin becomes too accessible and too easy. And what better way to do this than to be in gatherings of knowledge? And then we ended with a duty towards knowledge. Imam Ali alayhi salam, and we found it in other ahadith, there is a duty towards knowledge itself. The knowledge will go away if these gatherings do not take place. The knowledge dies. The Imams would say, it's not that knowledge never dies by itself. The way knowledge dies is that those who sit and share it amongst themselves go away. And as we said, we know that this is what happened in our religion. Not enough of this happened, so that what remains becomes marginal. You have to now go out of your way to seek the true knowledge, to try to find the true knowledge, because not enough sharing took place. And in any case, this is a bigger topic, but there was also a link that Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam were saying, were teaching us, teaching their followers, because to us this is a very big theme as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, to keep their cause alive. Ihya'u amrina. How do we keep the cause of Ahlul Bayt alive? Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam say, you sit, you gather in person together, and you share our wisdom and our knowledge amongst each other. That's how you keep our cause alive. So this is out of duty towards knowledge and our duty towards Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam directly. Now we go back to who? The discussion that we had, we emphasized certain categories. We said one category has to do with knowledge, the seeker and the carrier of knowledge. Who else? Yes, everyone. But specifically, how does our religion address it? We said our religion emphasized by age group. Huge emphasis on when you are young. The younger, the more emphasis to learn. So as a community of knowledge, now we have to think, what does this mean? How do we plan and how do we strategize and how do we come up with the best way to become a community of knowledge that gives those youth what they need? And that was a very long discussion, and we don't have time to go through all the points that we covered there. But we said this can never become an excuse for someone who no longer considers themselves a youth to say it's too late, because we also saw the opposite. And we also saw the reminders in our religion that you are a learner until you die. And it's not because you never learned that now it's too late. There is no such thing. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considers the old man who sits there to learn as though they are, and the thawab is incredible. Because they are not only a seeker of knowledge, they are fighting social stigmas and psychological barriers to learn the knowledge that they are learning. Especially if they are learning from someone who is younger. And this was mentioned in the ahadith. It should be as normal for this person to seek that knowledge from someone who is younger as eating bread, the Holy Prophet was saying in some of the ahadith. There were many ahadith there. So inshallah, this was also clear that we therefore cannot fall into the mistake of considering knowledge, learning Quran, learning how to pray, fasting, seerah, whatever. Different people have different categories for what age group should learn what. This is a grave mistake. There is nothing in our religion that is meant for children. Nothing. Religion is supposed to be understood by the deepest, brightest, purest minds. Because it's deep. There is a superficial way of understanding prayer, and there is a very deep way of understanding prayer. We should never think, yeah, but this is only teaching prayer. This is only learning how to read Quran. This is only memorizing a few verses of the Quran and understanding what they mean. There's no this is only in our religion. You have to see where you are and what is the next step. Focus on the next step. And so for adults or older people, the same thing applies. And as communities, we also have to see what are their needs. If that knowledge cycle stops, how is this person continuing to benefit? And how are they living in today's world that continuously keeps to get more and more complex? What keeps their faith refreshed? The Holy Quran is always emphasizing remembrance or reminders. إِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. You can't say, I already know it. The reminders are useful to those who have faith and belief. To the other person, they say, I already know it. I don't need to be reminded. I already know. It depends on your level of faith. Anyways, there's a lot more to say here, inshallah, to wrap it up. I think we have covered enough of what we have covered until now so that we can start building on it again, inshallah. What is to come is that as part of the who, to wrap up this topic, I think a quick word deserves to be said about woman and knowledge. Because of the perhaps misunderstandings, distortions that have arisen around this topic, I think it deserves to, we pause at this topic to cover it quickly. That's one. Another one needs to be as part of the community of knowledge to understand the family in the community of knowledge and what that means. The third point, what we have called, inshallah we'll explain it more, the intellectual in the community of knowledge and the role of the intellectual and what that means. And then the characteristics of the community of knowledge. What is it that we should expect from people to meet those characteristics? What should we expect in terms of attitude and in terms of results? And inshallah we'll see the unity, the harmony, the cohesion that should emerge out of a community of knowledge. I think we have a couple of points to be made around what I'm going to call the infrastructure of a community of knowledge. We live in a material world. We have to think about the material aspect of this community, the duties and responsibilities of such a community towards others. And then finally, a quick word, inshallah, on the idea of the knowledge community at large. What non-Muslims have said about this. And to what extent what we said applies, is comparable, is superior, is inferior, is different than what we find today in what is called knowledge societies, information societies, knowledge communities, communities of practice, and so on and so forth. So inshallah, we'll continue with this the next time we meet. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.